All right, next is Hersh Patel from Opacity. He's going to tell us WTF is ZKTLS.
Before I begin, just a show of hands, how many of you have heard of ZKTLS before? It's more than I was expecting. So I'm Hersh, co-founder, mad scientist at Opacity. My goal for this session is to convey three things. Explain to you what ZKTLS is, explain why identity verification in the context of disintermediated finance is a much harder problem than we think, and how ZKTLS can play a role in fixing that, or solving those problems. So if we take a step back, I got into crypto back when I was 16 years old in 2013, spent my entire career in the crypto startup grind trying to use this technology to solve actual problems and just failed miserably at every attempt. And after some deep thinking about why it's so hard to do something useful, I came to this thesis that I like to call the poverty of verifiability. And a lot of the issues or the questions that we have around identity verification and compliance in disintermediated finance, I would argue, comes down to this problem, where the internet was not set up for you to be able to prove things about yourself. You want to prove where you work, how much money you make, do you have a bank account? You really can't easily prove these types of things, and that's really the bottleneck that's causing us a lot of problems. And so the main model that's proposed in how to solve this problem is using verifiable credentials, which is a great, with adoption, it would be a great tool to have, but the main problem that you run into is if you want your bank statement as a credential signed, you actually have to go convince the bank to make software changes in their systems to start spitting out signed statements, right? And the reality is there's no incentive to do it. Best case scenario, there's a neutral incentive to do it. A lot of the times there's a negative incentive to do it because their moat is not having data leave their systems. And so we're stuck, it seems. One thing I think is underappreciated in crypto is just how hard it is to bootstrap networks. The two I want to focus on here is Visa and the DTC. Visa, in my opinion, really only worked out because Bank of America did Bank of America card themselves first in California, and then they leveraged that for a global network play. If you just went straight for the network play, I really don't think you'd be able to get the coordination you'd need to build a network like Visa. And for the DTC, it came out of brokerages going defunct because they couldn't keep up with the paperwork of settling securities transactions, I think in the 70s, right? So the two successful models that we have in regulated financial networks is you have someone bootstrap it, or there's a crisis that induces it. And the problems that we have, this problem of identity verification and disintermediated finance that we're dealing with right now, it really doesn't fit in either of those buckets neatly. And so the solution that we use with ZKTLS is a kind of a beautiful arbitrage where we build off of the existing security behind HTTPS. So TLS is the lock symbol that you see on your browser. It's how your browser knows you're actually talking to the chase server and not someone in the middle. And the core idea is you can let someone prove that they have, let's say, $5,000 in their bank account and the data originated from api.chase.com. And there's no intermediary in the middle. It's just non-custodially, the user proves it locally and then shares it with whoever they want to. Now, the significance of this is easier to explain through a specific use case. So one of our earlier partners is a project called Earnify, and they do basically payday lending in a market called earned wage access. So in the traditional product version of this, these companies go sell to Walmart to give their workers access to daily wages instead of getting paid every 2 weeks. But they charge, it's predatory rates that they charge. It could be 200% just to access your earnings early. And what these guys realized is if you just cut everyone out, you don't have to talk to Walmart, you don't have to talk to some HR system, you just have the user log into let's say Augusto, prove every day how many hours you're working, you can just live stream them their daily wages in stablecoins, and they give their users a stablecoin debit card. And they actually offer that service for free, is the crazy part. They make their money on the interchange of when people actually spend it. So the efficiency you get of just needing the user to cooperate, you don't need anyone in the middle. You go from predatory rates to being able to lend people money for free just because of the verification guarantees you get. Let's see. Now, there's a lot of talk today about compliance when it comes to stablecoin payments, but if we look out 10 years from now, the reason I got really excited about crypto when I was younger is the opportunity to just rebuild the financial markets from scratch, right? And so if you take composability to its limit, we'd have a world where you could use stablecoin payments. You can borrow against your S&P 500 on-chain at rock bottom rates, and there's no intermediaries in the middle. And the problem when it comes to identity verification between stablecoin payments and securities transactions is they look very different. For stablecoins, it's who are you and are you say who you are, are you actually the person who you're presenting as? And for securities, it looks a lot more like a gatekeeper, where are you allowed to make this specific transaction at the specific time under these certain requirements? And so the traditional model of having some identity provider sign some credential for all the information that you need for a securities transaction, let's say you're an accredited investor or not, it actually looks a lot like broker or exchange activity because there's a gatekeeping role if you don't have any other intermediary. And so in this model, I'd argue you're actually stuck in the existing financial market structure, where best case scenario, you're just gonna pad everyone's margins and move it over onto modern rails, but the market structure is not really you'll have 24/7 markets, but you're not gonna get DeFi and all the capital efficiencies we're looking for. And the main problem, I'd argue, comes out of subjectivity. If you look at the securities laws, where regulation comes into play is if you're relying on someone else's subjective decision-making for fiduciary responsibility, right? And so when it comes to disintermediating the capital markets, we have this problem of how do you remove subjectivity in identity verification, which is a very hard problem. And with ZKTLS, we have this opportunity to, where instead of using a centralized identity provider and having them extract their rents, you can just ask people to connect a bank account, connect a brokerage account. The Social Security Administration has a consumer-facing web portal where you can actually see your income for the last 50 years, right? And you can get that straight from ssa.gov. And so you have a user connect multiple discorrelated sources of identity information, cross-reference it, and the idea is you can actually make, Peter earlier was talking about, automating compliance checks on-chain directly. Well, that requires determinism to be able to do that. Or you just have a walled garden. And so if you can source information from multiple discorrelated sources, you can distribute the trust, and now you have, I would argue, a better way to verify someone's identity than how it's done today in the financial system. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
If you do, go to that microphone.
Many years ago, when I did some time working with DID and BC and stuff, and empathize with what you said about the bank's mode of their data. They don't want to give you the data. I'm curious if with any of the ZK TLS stuff, another issue that I remember running into was some of the regulations were cool, it's awesome that you can do all the ZK stuff, but the law says I need to have a raw copy of the data. Have you had any luck with anybody pushing forward on you don't actually need the raw data?
For securities, I really don't. I think it's very unlikely we would get to that world. As the US regulations exist today, you're gonna have to, I suspect we're gonna have to make the compromise of being able to retrieve that data where you can have maybe distributed network level storage or something like that, yeah.
So you're talking about a concept for verifying identity, I think, without having to access all the underlying information. But how do you extend this sort of principle and approach to assessing the risk that an individual presents outside of just verifying who they are?
Can you give a specific example, like credit risk?
I mean more with respect to someone's relation to a government. Like if they're a politically exposed person, for instance, and they might be at a higher risk of corruption or money laundering or whatever it might be. Is there a higher threshold that would still be necessary for financial institutions to take on that due diligence as opposed to other firms? And that's kind of like the area that you're trying to solve for, where the due diligence burden is lower?
So is the question where if someone is like a government employee and they're trying to trade in advance of like the interest rates changing or something like that?
It could be, or it could be that someone might not necessarily show up on an OFAC SDN list, but they have ties to a criminal cartel. And so verifying their identity is only helpful in as much as you can show who they are, but it doesn't necessarily provide the entity that's providing them a service with an understanding as to what kind of risk they pose.
Yeah, so, well, if you have there's many ways to build like a decentralized data storage and retrieval system where if after the fact someone gets put on some kind of sanctions list, you can search for whether their identity exists in the system and freeze accounts. But I will acknowledge, ultimately, human relationships can't be verified by software, right? Only the surveillance state can do that. And so the threshold we have to hit is like the level of guarantees you get in the existing financial system, in my opinion. And like I've used the same bank since I was in college, right? And I've got a new ID, I've moved multiple times, and I've not had to re-verify my identity at all. And so I think there's an opportunity to upgrade how we do identity verification in the financial system broadly, but there's a limit to what software can verify. Yeah.
Thanks.